All right.
All right. I think we're live on LinkedIn. I'm going to click go live on, if it lets me. Oh, it's going to take a second for Insta.
All right. I am confirmed we are live on LinkedIn.
And we are live on Insta. And I don't actually have YouTube up. Last time it didn't work, but it's fine. We have no following there. Well, we do end up taking it down anyway because I'm posting our own after. So, all right, let's see. How do I get into this event? I'm still trying to get into it.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Please drop in the chat what you're excited to hear about today. This is going to be an impassionate debate, and we encourage you all to connect with each and every one of you. We encourage you all to connect with one another in order to improve your networking and opportunities in the future.
All right. Oop, I think I'm not on mine. I'm on a different one. There we go. All right.
All right.
And I'm in. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We will get started in about 30 seconds. Justin lets me get started with 1 minute left over, which I say every time, but thank you everyone for coming in and letting us join your homes and your offices and wherever you are for an hour of your time. We're very excited about today. So drop your name, drop where you're calling in from, drop your LinkedIn, and please network with one another. As you know, we are very big on folks connecting with each other and building your own brands as well. And I think it's time to start. So very excited about today. It's going to be different than we've done ever before. We have Simina Fodor. She brings 10 years across IT delivery, Agile transformation, product strategy. She's a professional certified Scrum Master. And she has SAFe, and she also, as she puts it, has a lifetime of school of scope creep, which we are all very familiar with. She's a delivery manager and a PM career coach, just really a seasoned leader who turns strategy into outcomes. She's a mentor, and she just brings a lot of humor and honesty to everything she does on LinkedIn, to her projects. So this is going to be fun, a little bit different. Agile Wars. We have not talked yet about anything, so we're ready to go. And Simina, before we start rumbling here, can you just introduce yourself, welcome, and just kind of introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Well, first off, hey everyone. I'm super excited to be here, especially because this topic is one that I'm highly passionate about. Just a quick intro about myself. I've spent the last 10 years or so in delivery, leading teams, distributed teams, basically remote teams across different continents, from Europe to Southeast Asia, North and South America. I've been helping organizations turn strategy in things that are real and measurable. My background is a little bit unconventional. I didn't start out in project management or as a Scrum Master. I've actually came through HR and training before moving on to tech. And right now I work as a delivery manager, which means I sit in the messy middle between vision and execution. And on any given day, I connect the dots between engineering, product, and business. And I'm trying to keep the flow alive across multiple different teams that rarely share a time zone. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm also a content creator outside my 9 to 5, and I'm a mentor. I run a newsletter that's called Scrum and SaaS. It's my little corner of the internet where I share the human side of Agile, the burnout, boundary settings, and all of those interesting conversations that hide behind the metrics. And that's pretty much the space I live in.
Perfect. We're glad to have you here, and thank you for trying this format out with us. Let's get started. I think it'll be important to kind of set the stage. Simina, if you would kind of give us a brief overview of what the Scrum Master role is and any of the evolutions that have happened in the last decade towards that Agile principles or the Agile approach of project management.
Well, sure. When it comes to the Scrum Master role, so a little bit of overview for those that maybe aren't necessarily familiar with the Agile frameworks or Scrum in particular, is that the major difference between a Scrum Master and a project manager is that the Scrum Master is a servant leader, meaning that they're not the team leader of the team, they're not the manager of the team. They basically help teams get self-organized. They help teams get to a point where they're self-organizing. They coach the teams, and they're not responsible for the team performance. They're responsible for the overall flow and the process. They basically ensure that the team gets to a pace where they do end up being self-organized, but without imposing anything. So they have more of a facilitation role rather than a command and center type of approach. Now, if we think back all the way to the Agile Manifesto, and given the fact that it's been more than 20 years since it actually came about, there have been many different evolutions and many changes along the way. And one of the things that well matters in my opinion mostly about agile is the fact that we do evolve. So we inspect, we adapt, but we evolve. So in my mind, the scrum master role also evolves with technology, with the times, because 20 years ago we didn't have the technology that we have right now. So what are scrum masters basically doing right now? Well, they will be partnering up with AI eventually. So they will be more focused on the human side of things rather than metrics, all of the other things that do pair up and deliver. And that's just to keep it short.
Okay, so I want to dig into this because I heard a lot. I'm like ready to argue. But first, can you also give us a quick overview of what the delivery manager is? And then I'm ready to jump, man.
I was the same.
Sure. Well, I think the easiest way to do that is to do a comparison. So if you have the Scrum Master that operates at the team level, and then you have the project manager that thinks about the project and what we actually aim to deliver, you have the delivery manager that operates at an organization level. So the delivery manager is the person that's usually operating across multiple different teams. They're doing dependency management, they're doing risk management, they're doing scope management. Sometimes they're even doing financial tracking. They're also involved in stakeholder relationships. They're assisting the product owner with those relationships and making sure that people are communicating. But here's the thing, and this is something that you're going to hear me say a lot. It depends. Because if you ask 7 different people in 5 different organizations, what does the delivery manager role do? They're going to say different things. It depends on the organization, it depends on the structure, how large that organization is, and what does the team actually need. So I do believe that at the end of the day, probably not just the delivery manager, but any role in any organization has to fit the team that they're going into and has to fit the organizational culture that they're going to be going into. So there isn't really a one size fits all. But to, yeah, Elizabeth, you wanted to say something?
Okay. All right. I'm ready, man. Okay. Okay. First of all, okay. So first of all, to me, you just described the delivery manager as basically what the project manager does. But okay, you said the Scrum Master is keeping the team on track. They're not, I think you said like they're not leading or managing. They don't, and that the project manager cares less about keeping the team on track, but keeping the project on track. And I wanted to start there. And if I heard you wrong, let me know. But
Mhm.
the project manager, in my opinion, so I think I've mentioned this before. I personally find it easier for the project manager to also play the scrum master because everything you said that the scrum master does, the project manager does do and care about. I think it's the environment you're in. But the project manager, and I even saw like a LinkedIn on this the other day saying the project manager is like, what can we fit into the project? And the scrum master is saying, no, we have to, stick with only what's in the sprint and maintain that. And I'm like, no, the project manager cares just about as much about the team, is on the ground with the team, cares about the sprints and their velocity too, because if you miss a sprint or you miss like what you're committing to, the project, yes, goes off the rails. So we have a wider scope, but I do not see that difference. Like the scrum master or the project manager, they should both be leaders and they should both overall care about the end result.
Well, we can agree to disagree.
Okay.
I'm so here's how I see things here. If I think about the traditional project manager role, that used to be a command and control type of approach. So you used to push tasks. You would be the one that would be assigning tasks to the different team members that you would have in a project team. Whereas the Scrum Master is the one that's empowering the team. It's the push versus the pull system. So that's where I see the difference. And it's the fact that Usually project managers, they're not coaching team members. Well, if they have issues around performance or not meeting deadlines, sure, but they don't necessarily focus that much on the overall collaboration and team dynamics. I think they have different accountabilities. And at the end of the day, they have different goals, because as a project manager, you are responsible for the iron triangle. So you care about scope, you care about budget, and you care about your timeline. But the Scrum Master doesn't necessarily care about the timeline in regards to their main objective, because they care about the team and they care about making the team as efficient as possible, so they do get to the point where they actually deliver value.
Okay, so
He's
I'm
gonna
hearing some resonance here, and I appreciate this, but I think we're going to find that this is probably going to be the biggest contention. The phrase servant leader or servant leader does not just apply to Scrum Masters. It applies to any leadership role that is in the position to influence without authority. Specifically, we talked about your Scrum Master points: servant leader, self-organization, not focused on people management, and a facilitation role. That is what I espouse to, and I think Elizabeth espouses to the project manager role. But
see about it all the time too. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
We have also the delivery manager, which we've referenced as able to organize multiple different projects or Scrum teams and manage the scope, financial, and working with different stakeholders. To me, that is either a project manager role from the finance and the stakeholder management side, or a program manager. And then finally, the other piece that I wanted to talk about was the Scrum Master role. In its name says Scrum. So a Scrum Master role is defined as only a role for Scrum methodology. It is not all the variations of Agile. It is not the hybrid. It is not the waterfall. So I will pause there. There's a lot that I threw out at you, Simina, and I'll let you choose how you want to start that conversation.
Well, let's take it one step at a time. Starting with the Scrum Master as a terminology, as a role. Yes, it is bound to Scrum, but just as we apply Agile principles in our daily lives, it doesn't mean that we cannot apply the accountability of the roles to other type of organizations, and organizations that are not necessarily following Scrum by the book. They're doing Kanban, or perhaps they're doing something hybrid, because just as we would consider Agile at its core, it doesn't have a project manager role defined. It doesn't have an Agile project manager. It doesn't have a delivery manager for that matter as well. So you have the different evolutions and the reality and the needs, how different roles came about. And then when it comes to the servant leadership aspect of things, yes, I do think that's part of the evolution. If we think about PMI and all of the organizations that are governing project management, they've evolved as well, because I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, there wasn't that much talk about servant leadership and about the fact that we are supposed to be coaching people, we're supposed to be empowering people to actually deliver that value. So I think it's a two sides to everything when you start to think about things. And well, it depends.
But you're making that argument that Scrum Master roles have to evolve, but at the same time, you're talking project managers are top down or dictatorship, but they've also evolved. But the roles and responsibilities are significantly different. A project manager is a broader scope of roles from both the finance, the delivery, the organization, and larger than just the Scrum team itself. And the Scrum Master is specific to an Agile team and its many stakeholders. A delivery manager and a Scrum Master combined together equal a project manager.
Well, I would tend to argue. I would say that the Scrum Master and the project manager make up a delivery manager role, because a delivery manager doesn't just operate across different projects, because they also have to consider dependencies. For example, if you have a project that's in tech or in IT, you also have to consider your infrastructure, you have to consider your compliance, you have to consider financial aspects, legal aspects, and they work on those as well. And to reference your point, Justin, you're also mentioning project managers, the financial aspect of things. I do think things are a little bit different here, specifically because of that dependency management aspect of things. So when you're working as a project manager, I'm going to go back to the accountabilities and what you're actually aiming towards. You're focused on the project. But rather, as a delivery manager, I'm also thinking about the overall system. I'm also thinking about whether a new product that we're building as a company, can that still sustain the company and not make the company break from a scalability perspective, from a security perspective, from all other aspects that perhaps in traditional project management aren't necessarily that being discussed or focused on.
They should be, though. So, and there can be some crossover between project and program here, but ultimately a project manager should, and this is what Justin and I are always trying to teach, right? Should not only be focused on task and execution and budget and scope. They should be looking upstream and downstream. They have to work on dependency management, because that's part of keeping to the project plan they built. If they have dependencies they're waiting on, I mean, even, I'm going to bring this up, Justin's going to kill me. Even PMI talks about inputs and outputs, right? To every single phase of a project. Those are dependencies, right? At the core of project management. So project managers do manage the dependencies. That's part of their entire role in order to keep a project on track. They have to navigate across all the stakeholders. They build that stakeholder register to identify who all of those different teams are. That can include IT, that can include security, that can include product. Right. So right now, I'm still not seeing a difference between what you're saying a delivery manager is and a project manager is.
Let's go to the chat. There's a lot of that's happening here. And I think, Simina, I've also heard the delivery manager doesn't just go to other projects, but is just helping supplement the project financials, the risk management, the issue management of a project. It's that ancillary piece to a Scrum Master on, I don't want to say just the stakeholder management, but the administrative roles. Is that something that you agree to, that you see? I know it's not going to be a blanket statement.
Well, you're right. It's not going to be a blanket statement. I think the way the delivery manager role actually came about is specifically from that need, because if you think about what a Scrum Master does on a day-to-day basis, they cannot take on the responsibility of a delivery manager. So they work within a single team. They're responsible for a single team, their flow, their processes, and everything that's delivery connected to that particular team. And I think the way that Agile evolved, well, if you think about the theory, again, the delivery manager role shouldn't exist. Teams should be self-organized and they should be able to work with each other. But I think that's where the need actually came, because we do have those dependencies and we do have to consider scalability. Normally, when we go back to the frameworks, the financial aspect of things, those should be divided between the product owner, perhaps, and some of the stakeholders. If we think about risks, well, risks should be managed at a team level. But what do you do when you have different teams that perhaps are working on the same product? And because of the size of that product, you cannot have a single team that's comprised out of, I don't know, 30 engineers.
Right.
So I think it's a matter of evolution. And Justin, going back to your point that, well, why do we even have delivery managers if we have project or program managers? I think it's also a matter of perspective and how we're naming the roles. So there is some overlap within these roles, and whether we call them delivery managers or program managers, I think the important aspect is what do they actually do and what is the value that they bring. So while we may not agree on the terminology and we may not see eye to eye on that, I do think at the end of the day, the accountability part is more important. And where are we going towards delivery and going back to that added value again?
Do you see?
Go ahead.
I just had a quick question. Do you see the delivery manager as more like the project manager or the program manager?
More closely to the program manager, I think, because they don't operate at a single project level.
Okay, so then that's why I'm probably veering away from the delivery manager, because I've heard that delivery managers could be at the project and the program level. That kind of makes things a little bit difficult. So let's go through an example, because I think that will be helpful for people. Since, Simina, you have worn all three hats before, can you walk me through either an example in which you are either working with three different people who have those roles and how it's been successful or not successful?
Yes. So personally, because I've worn all those three different hats and sometimes in the same company, it is It might not make sense for other people, but I'm going to give you a really straightforward example. So when it comes to software delivery, the difference and how these roles basically come together and overlap is a little bit easier because if we think about Agile, if we think about software development in general, it's easier to implement those. Of course, Agile can be implemented in other industries as well. I'm not dismissing that as an idea, but it's easier to relate to software development. So an example that I can give you is a most recent product that I worked on for an application that does HR surveys in terms of salary ranges and stuff like that. And we, for this product or application in particular, we have 3 different teams that are working on the same product. And the reason why we couldn't have a single team is because of the size, the number of engineers that we had. We do need all of the teams because some of the engineers are working on a legacy version of the application, while some are working on the revamping of the application. So where do we have all the different roles? Well, we have this Scrum Master, which is working, several different Scrum Masters that are working for all of these teams, but they do have to work together. They do have to ensure that the overall product goal is still being considered. They do have to ensure that delivery timelines are being consistent and are being shared. And uh, other than that, we do have the dependency aspect of things because we have 3 teams that are working on the same product and that have to work together. So where does the delivery manager role come in here? Well, they oversee all of these teams. And the delivery manager basically makes sure that the teams communicate with each other. They're basically handling their dependency mapping. They're communicating in terms of prerequisites. They're communicating in terms of what do they need from each other, either from a technical standpoint, dependencies, things that have to be done in a certain order of things, or perhaps in terms of timelines. So that's the overlap, I would say, between the Scrum Master and the delivery manager. And then when does the project manager come in here? Well, it's a little bit tricky because in this particular case, they also have an interface with the customer. So they're somewhat part of the product organization rather than the delivery organization. So they do interact with the customer, making sure that those requirements are captured, changes are captured. They do interact in terms of making sure contracts and all of those legal things are being taken care of. But they also have to collaborate with the delivery manager because we're talking about budgets, we're talking about making sure timelines are communicated. And especially in organizations that are thinking and are projecting waterfall but are working agile, and that's one of the most common things that is happening out there when it comes to reality. Most of the organizations are taking waterfall and are communicating timelines to customers in terms of waterfall approaches, but they're actually internally working in agile. So that's the way the roles intertwine, and it's not that straightforward, and I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I was actually going to transition to a different comment, but E, as usual, well, we're not. We sometimes are aligned, sometimes we're not. What is this?
So yeah, Daryl just said he was trying to explain. He's like he feels that Scrum Master is a team advocate, delivery manager is the department advocate, and a project manager is a business advocate. I agree to that to a point. I'd love to hear what Simina thinks because I think he was speaking to what she was saying.
Well, I actually agree with this statement, and I think it summarizes the whole conversation so far. So it's really a great comment.
So thank you, Daryl.
All right. So I see a comment from Samuel Sam Taylor.
Okay.
This is really interesting, but I'm concerned about staying with scope within my project manager role if the Scrum Master is responsible for the flow of things. As we know, a Scrum Master is helping to facilitate the sprint execution by the team pulling their backlog, having a sprint plan goal, and going through the Scrum method. Is there a lot of conflict that you have seen between a Scrum Master and a project manager on the scope of the project?
Well, yes and no. Meaning that in terms of overall scope, well, it's definitely, I do think it's the project manager's accountability. They are responsible for the overall scope. But in terms of what goes into each sprint, then yes, there can be a lot of conflicts, especially in organization where the project manager also acts as a product owner, and they're the ones that are bringing in requirements, especially when it happens after the sprint has started, because they have to react to certain, I don't know, business changes, market conditions, and things like that. There can be that, I would call it, conflictual relationship in terms of scope, because the Scrum Master is going to try to protect the team. They're going to try to remove blockers, which means that they're not going to be that straightforward when it comes to bringing changes into the sprint. So it would have to be a negotiation at some point in time. It would have to be a trade-off. If something comes in, something goes out.
Well, you've made it muddy by trying to say that the product owner and the project manager
But I
are the
just see
same.
that.
You
Yeah,
keep,
that's exactly where it's
there's a
going.
lot of muddying of the waters here. So go ahead.
So let's clarify that, because that you and I are both honing in on that. Is I have not been in. Okay, I have worn both hats for sure. I've been product and project and program altogether, right? But I have not been the person who is pushing for a specific feature or new scope creep within a specific sprint, because my role is not actually product, right? It's that symbiotic relationship with project.
Mhm.
I've never seen it where the project manager is. That's not true. I've been both, but it's still about protecting the overall project against the business value, right? So for me, and I think it goes back to what you said before, which I'm going to get to eventually, but I know we have more questions to ask or to answer. But in my opinion, the project manager is going to protect that committed scope to the sprint just as much as any Scrum Master will, because as soon as you start adding that scope creep, everything goes off the rails and the project is going to go off the rails too, right? So I think that the muddying of the water, I haven't really seen that from that perspective, but I also think, again, yeah, I just haven't seen that, and it doesn't make sense to me why we would say the project manager is going to try and push more things into the sprint. Like, if anything, it's our job to protect it, but how do we reprioritize everything and relook at the plan for the following sprints to get our project back on track?
Yeah, well, I think it definitely depends on the organization. I've been part of organizations where project manager also had a little bit of the product owner component and having that interaction with the customer. So I think I may be biased because of that specific experience that I had. But then again, that's just a personal view.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm noticing some themes in the chat, and this gets down to you have three roles that are kind of taking on pieces of a project manager's role, a classic project manager role. So let's talk about this for a second. You've held all three roles for one project. Is that right, Simina?
Yep.
So is it just that the organizations are combining these roles because they don't want to pay for three and because of their budget, or is it because they lack the understanding of what these three roles entail?
I think it's a combination of both. In terms of budgets, well, if we think of the current state of the market right now, most organizations are going to be combining roles because they're going to try to be as efficient as possible with their costs. So right now, if you check job postings, most of them are a combination between Scrum Masters and project managers. Even at some point in time, you may have an HR component to it. You might have a line management, and people are reporting directly to that project manager or Scrum Master, depending on how they call it. Or you might even have the terminology of Agile delivery manager that's encompassing everything. So it is a combination. And we do have a lot of organizations that are saying that they're Agile, but they haven't really gone through an Agile transformation. They haven't really gone through the workshops, through the mindset change and everything. And there is still that lack of understanding of what does each role do. So there is that evolutionary part of it, but there are some organizations that don't understand the differences between the roles and the accountabilities, and they're trying to group everything together as much as possible, and well, costs again.
Because this came up in our conversation with Elias, one of our directors of recruitment, that they're seeing less roles of Scrum Masters in the marketplace and more project manager roles. And I believe the biggest nuance between them is the understanding of Agile approaches to projects. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so knowing that, the project manager's role has high-level road mapping, detailed planning, facilitating of teams for self-organization, just like a Scrum Master, needs to understand multiple different methodologies, has the budget and finance piece, and has the risk and issue management and dependencies. why isn't the Scrum Master role just a subset of a project manager?
Well, that's a good question. Um, and I don't have a straightforward answer to that. Well, probably sometime in the future, if we think about evolution, we might get to a point where the Scrum Master role as a function won't even probably exist and will be swallowed up by one of the other roles. But if I go back to the simplicity of Agile and how things came about, it was about that self-organization part. So you did have Scrum Masters that would be paired with certain teams, and they would eventually get to a point where the teams would be so mature that they might not even end up needing a Scrum Master. So I think it's a matter of evolution. You do raise a fair point, Justin. We might get to a point where the role might not even exist anymore.
And this gets me to an important piece when I was looking at your Substack. At the evolution of the Scrum Master role, you touched on something that I felt was very contentious or problematic for change managers specifically. You were mentioning that Scrum Masters need to start moving towards change management understanding. And I would love you to explain a little bit more on that, because what I'm seeing is the Scrum Master role is trying to take on the change manager role, project manager role, and some client relationship engagement pieces.
Well, yeah, it's all about that evolution aspect, especially if we consider how much AI has been a part of our lives, whether personal or professional lives. It is about evolution. And if we don't evolve, we get left behind. So, similar to any major technology evolution that we've had in the past, like typewriters switching over to computers and stuff like that, I do believe that it's pretty much the same for Scrum Masters. They either evolve or they get swallowed up. Whether the title or the name will remain the same, that remains to be seen. But in terms of change management, well, we are going to get to a point where we need people that can do a lot of things, not just what they're being used to. So use AI efficiently, of course, not outsource your thinking, but use it as a partner. And that also comes into play when it comes to strategic thinking. It comes into play with financial management, that dependency part of things, stakeholder management, and change management as well, because they do have to understand how the organization works and how does it uh, basically impact things in terms of strategy and vision. So to me, it kind of feels like it's a natural evolution, especially given the day and age we are right now with AI.
So you think it's a natural evolution for them to become change managers, or a natural evolution for them to eventually become project managers?
More towards project managers, delivery managers, but they do have to encompass that part of change management as well.
Because change management is this whole other separate beast where, yes, project managers need to understand it, but it goes so much further where that's why there are actually separate roles as change managers.
Yes, but if we think about the market right now, we don't have that many individual change manager roles, so those are being swallowed up by other roles as well.
I would contend on that one, but I also saw the other degree. So I'm going to split this into two pieces. The change manager role involves a lot of understanding of the human psychology piece of how to increase adoption, and also the methodology for change management. You got Cotter, 8AKR, and various other different elements. Project manager is more about capturing that intended business value and working with change management leads or other subject matter experts. When a Scrum Master is put into the mix, and I see this conversation happening between Ben and E on the chat here, I don't think it's a whole circular conversation. I think we're getting to the actual heart of this, which is Scrum Masters have to move towards project manager roles.
I agree with that. They have to, in my opinion.
To be relevant, and we saw that Sibdo also mentioned that the Scrum Master role was one of the most laid off roles in 2025.
Yep.
That there being, from the Agile war perspective, the delivery manager sits at the top, which is a program level based on this conversation, and the project manager and Scrum Master role, the project manager wins because the Scrum Master has to evolve to the project manager role. But that's not where I want this debate to end, because we need to talk about the future of 2026.
Yeah.
Which is around the concepts of the Scrum Master role needs to stay, has to evolve. And how is it evolving? There is a piece around change management that they want to get. At the same time, change managers also want to understand project management because there is this melding of roles that is happening. I don't understand what's going to happen, but from the modern project management skills of the future project manager, they need to understand the fundamentals of change management, which drives towards that piece. I'm just curious as to, from a Scrum Master role, what do you think the change management pieces do they need to learn?
Well, when it comes to change management, there are already some skills that are transferable, because we think about agile transformations and the involvement that we have for Scrum Masters early on in the process, because they do help with that transition, with that resistance to change. So there are certain principles that could be applied from there. Now, I'm not saying that the Scrum Master has to have the full accountability of a change manager, because that would be a lot, but it goes back to that evolutionary piece of it. So what we have right now is definitely not going to work anymore, especially because how the job market currently is. So you either evolve or you get swallowed up. And I do believe Scrum Masters have to evolve to know a little bit of everything, not just what they're currently doing on right now, not focused only on the team level, because they do have transferable skills. They do have soft skills, they do have communication, they have facilitation, they have that coaching aspect of things, but they just have to take it up a notch a little bit, if that makes sense. So that's why it kind of makes sense. I somewhat agree with what you mentioned, Elizabeth, that they do have to evolve towards the project manager, but they still have to keep that servant leadership aspect of things, which, as we know, part of the evolution project managers also consider now. But it's a little bit more than that. So in my opinion, they have to do a little bit of everything in order to stay relevant, because, well, 2026 is going to be even worse than this year. And we don't know exactly what the future holds, but we have to be prepared for it. So the more you learn, the more you're willing to invest in your evolution, I think the better you are prepared for the market in the next year and the years to come.
Yeah, and I mean, the servant leadership is the other thing that got me at the beginning. I know we kind of transition now, so I have to reduce my passion on that level, because I think project managers, they also are on the ground of the team. There is the servant leader aspect, there's very human dynamics. But when we look at where the Agile manager is going to, where the Scrum Master, clearly you know where I'm going, where the Scrum Master is going to evolve to, I don't really see change involved in that. I don't even really see them as fully part of an Agile transformation. Yes, if you move to Agile and you move to Scrum specifically, you'll have a Scrum Master. But I feel like more that natural evolution is we're managing the scope of and the schedule of these teams, right? We're on the ground with them. That naturally makes me feel like then that the natural evolution is start managing more schedules, start managing more teams. They're already looking at the dependencies, right? Because they have to help unblock teams. So for me, the natural evolution is let's start showing them how to use the budget, showing them how to create the project plans, right? And because that just seems like that's the next step, not change, because change, again, being a whole other beast.
Okay. I've been looking at some of the questions, and Lamine, some of these questions I'm going to answer you after the call because they're not relevant particularly to the debate itself, but there is one, which I think Elizabeth and I have talked about in our various TikTok videos or in other YouTube channel, which is, if you have these multiple roles, who owns the single source of truth for the project?
And who said that so I can find them? And
Samuel.
Okay. We'll give it to you, Simina.
Well, that's a good question. Well, if I think about the accountabilities, that would be the project manager because it's in their title.
Correct.
Not only that, but because of how project managers operate, you can't have the Scrum Master because, well, they operate at the team level and you may have multiple teams. And it can't necessarily be the delivery manager because they operate at the organization level. So they would have multiple projects, multiple teams. So I would kind of tend to, yeah, I'm leaning towards project manager.
And I agree with you because the Scrum Master would have, let's call it the sprint details that would come to the project manager. The project manager would have the holistic element of the project, risks, issues, budget, roadmap. anything that has to do with stakeholder management. And then that gets reported up to a delivery manager, which would be the program manager. Now, I'm not going to bring the program and delivery manager bout together today. It just sounds like a renaming. But there is a question in the chat.
I just found Samuel's. All right, continue.
From it's right under Samuel is
okay, good.
Manek Das. How would you put the roles of SAFe settings like RTE and SPC in the context of project managers, program managers, and delivery managers?
Let's also define what RTE and SPC is. So release train engineer is RTE, and I can't remember what SPC is. So someone help me out there.
Well, I do feel strongly about this one because when it comes to SAFe, well, me personally, it is a little bit different than Agile. I know that it's supposed to be scaled Agile, but it's a little bit closer to waterfall. It does borrow some of the principles from Agile, the lightweight principles and things like that, but it's more closer to waterfall rather than Agile. So if we think about the roles that we have in SAFe, well, we don't call them project managers, program managers, delivery managers, because we call them release train engineers, Scrum Masters, Scrum of Scrums, and stuff like that. So it is a little bit of a different beast, I would call it. And when it comes to SAFe, what I've noticed in my experience in the companies that I've worked with in the past is you would tend to have less project managers and more Scrum Masters and RTEs and other roles. So it's a little bit, yeah, it's a different beast altogether.
It is a beast. I'll admit to that, man. I've worked in hybrid organizations, so like hybrid SAFe. And it wasn't until I worked in those that I even understood the certification that I took almost. It was, I mean, it's a whole different beast. Yeah.
And some of the responsibilities you would see in a normal Agile, if that even exists, that a delivery manager does, you would have an RT do during PI planning. And it's very, very different. And yeah, I do still believe it's a whole different beast.
I have a bone to pick with PI planning, but that is not the topic of this discussion for today.
I like PI planning.
I want to tackle Pearl's question, but I want to frame it in a different way. Simina, we've just talked about Scrum Masters need to evolve. There are two general paths that they can take unless you, I'll preface it this way. They can become an Agile coach if the organization is enabling Agile from a top down, or they can go into a project manager role by understanding more of the business acumen, the financial literacy pieces. Is that a fair statement, or are there other avenues that a Scrum Master role can take?
Well, there are definitely other avenues that the Scrum Master role can take. I mean, they can go and even change the industries because they do have transferable skills, especially the soft skills. But those are the most common ones you would see. They would either transition into an Agile coach or a project manager or a delivery manager, sometimes even a program manager. But some folks even prefer the training aspect of things. So they might want to change approaches altogether, and they might want to do trainings instead, but the most common ones are towards Agile coaching and projects.
Okay. Yeah, you could also go into PMO if you wanted to. It just depends on the passion, but the idea here is it depends on the skills that are needed in order to bridge that gap. And for the Agile coaching is only as effective as leadership supporting an Agile principled organization, similar to how you would enable AI. If you're going to use an AI within an organization, it needs to have the governance, the culture that drives towards it. I see that there's some vibing going on between Ben and E around SAFe framework is Agile, then less waterfall. So maybe that you guys can expand a little bit upon that while I'm scanning the comments for something.
No, Ben commented on this, and I caught it when you were saying Simina, but I ended up focusing somewhere else with the whole it's a beast topic. I was like, yeah, and I forgot about, you said it's waterfall. I don't see SAFe as being anything like waterfall, because for me, waterfall, when I think waterfall, and again, this goes back to my traditional training when I got my PMP certification years ago, right? Is waterfall is extremely resistant to change. You want to make a change, everything stops, and it takes a very long time to get that approved and things like that. SAFe for me is actually, yeah, there's a cadence to the releasing, but it's still very flexible in my opinion. Yes, you got your PI planning of what you're going to be working on as a priority, but I don't know. I don't think it's anything like waterfall, because again, I do think that there is the agility there. You always, regardless of waterfall or agile or whatever methodology you're using, there's going to be a project plan or a roadmap you're working against. So that's just my thought on it.
Okay. I want to flip the script here because our debate kind of died by saying that Scrum Master role needs to evolve. So, Simina, let's talk about what it is that you particularly do not like or don't agree with in the current face of what project management is.
Well, this is something that I feel quite strongly about, and it also applies to Scrum Mastery as well, and delivery manager as well, is that the folks that are doing these roles, these functions, are admins to some extent, meaning that, well, you do have the task management aspect of things, you do have the reporting aspect of things, and people that are not that familiar with the industry or with the roles sometimes have the tendency to basically put folks like these in a category of, oh, they're the team secretary. That's all they do. So this is something that I necessarily don't agree with. So project manager is not the secretary, a Scrum Master is not the secretary, a delivery manager is not the secretary.
But there's two things that I hate about this argument. One, it depends on the organization, on how they view these roles, which you've just emphasized, but it's also on the capabilities of the individuals. If none of these individuals understand the business processes, organizational context, politics, financial literacy, their capabilities are limited to coordination and task execution. One, either because they're not willing to learn, or two, they just don't have the capacity to learn it.
But that's not the fault of the role itself should not be an administrator. Like, this is something that it bugs me too, is that if the person doesn't have the capability to be more than a task manager, then they either better grow or they shouldn't be in the role. The role itself should not be task management. Like, I'm with Simina on this 100%. Our role is not to take meeting notes. Our role is not to do everything everybody says, can you handle this? I don't have time for it. That's not the role of any of these 3 delivery project or Scrum Master roles.
And I agree with Elizabeth here. We shouldn't limit the role because we have different people that have a certain limitation when it comes to their skills or their willingness to learn. So I think it should be the other way around. But
I mean, the whole concept of taking meeting minutes to me is just an absolute. That's a very low hanging fruit argument, and I actually think that if you need to manage the narrative, you take the meeting minutes. But that's not the point here. Is if you're having trouble changing the perspective of how you influence an organization or a team, listen to the problems that they have and address them. And if you can't, then probably the role isn't for you.
So we're all in agreement. So I'm confused now because we're all in agreement that the role should not be an admin, right?
I don't think it's an admin role in the first place. If it's an admin role, it's because somebody is not doing something in regards to their actual role. I've actually taken over responsibility as a project manager from my client because my predecessor wasn't doing the job and they were filling in that role. It just has to do with the ability to be a business advocate. But maybe that's just a goose chase in terms of a conversation.
I think it might be on that one.
Simina, I want to know, what advice do you have for Scrum Masters right this second who are listening to this and have heard the debate that basically the project manager role has won the debate for right now? What advice do you have for them?
Well, continue to learn, never stop learning. So if you are currently stuck within a single team, do what you must. Basically, get yourself a mentor, get yourself a sponsor, network as much as you can, and step outside of that team. So try to learn as much as possible about the business. Try to learn as much as possible about potentially other skills. If you don't have financial acumen, go do that, go learn that, and also network a lot because, well, there are a lot of people out there that are willing to be mentors and that are willing to share information for absolutely free without receiving anything in return. So I think that would be the best bet if you still want to succeed in the next few years, especially given the evolution and how the market is currently, well, going actually.
Perfect. I think that's great advice. We could probably break that down into further details around what the skills are, but if people are rehashing, I think we've touched on the key ones, which is fundamentals of change management, financial literacy, influence without authority, um, business acumen, really understanding how a business makes or loses money, and the business processes. But I saw a comment that was in the chat here between Daryl and Elizabeth, and I 100% disagree with you, E.
What?
You are not going to have an executive assistant or whatever a PC stands for in this context.
Project coordinator?
Okay, well, most projects don't have a project coordinator. So if they don't have a project coordinator, then I'm leaning towards what Ben is talking about, which is meeting minutes is owned by the project manager, the business analyst, or whatever role it is within the team towards managing the expectations, the action items, and the narrative. These aren't, and the project manager has to review them. Sorry, I went down an entire diatribe here.
So we already pulled up this question. I'm looking at the question again from Samuel, this one here, the how do you ensure consistent communication during change responsibilities and spread across the different roles because of the single source of truth? I guess my question is, when you have an organization that has all of these roles, how do you navigate who owns what? Where is that? I mean, because I feel like there's that inner fighting here of this is my role, this is my role. So I know you've been in these organizations when there's all three, right? I have not. I've been both Scrum Master and Project Manager at the same time. Again, I prefer that because I want to be on the ground with the team knowing things. I don't want to be, I don't want to get information secondhand. It drives me nuts. I'm like, because why would I not be in the Scrum or the daily stand-up? So I want to know how you handle that, right? Where you're reducing that friction. Because for me, again, as you know, I'm like, just have me be the same role. And I know you don't agree with that.
Well, I think it's all a matter of communication and syncing as often as possible. And well, I know that sometimes there can be certain friction between people that are doing these functions, these roles, but when it comes to delivery and working in projects, I think ego has to be one of the first things that goes. So it shouldn't matter why are we stepping on each other's feet when all that matters is the value and the projects and the delivery timeline. So rather than focusing on why should be the project manager in charge of certain things, rather, I don't know, maybe do a RACI if that works. Discuss certain items if it works better, document things or communicate as often as possible. Have a Slack channel, do something, communicate. So I do still believe that communication is it's at the baseline of everything. And if these folks don't communicate with each other, how do you expect the teams to work together? So they have to be promoting communication first before others are doing the same thing.
But this is it goes back to like the Scrum of Scrums for me, right? I'm like, I don't want to be in a Scrum of Scrums. Like, I don't want to, because I can't attend this daily stand-ups, right? Like, and again, how much of this belongs to the Scrum Master of chasing down the obstacles and things like that versus how much belongs to the project manager? Because if I'm not in the daily stand-up and I have to wait for the Scrum Master to update me of where things are in the project, and then I could have already been on top of it. So yeah, you're still communicating, but I feel like you're playing telephone. And that's where I'm like, how do you break that barrier where you're not playing telephone and waiting when things could have been jumped on sooner? And do you even think the Scrum Master is responsible then for, again, because as a project manager perspective, I say we are supposed to be removing the obstacles for the team. Is the Scrum Master doing that? And then again, how is that extra? It's like extra communication, extra layers that I feel create the friction.
Well, the Scrum Master is supposed to be the one that's removing roadblocks for the team. And in terms of communication, well, async communication helps. I mean, how long does it take you to type a message with a certain update that you have? It doesn't take more than a few seconds, a few minutes. If you have AI doing it for you, if you're already doing minutes with AI, it's not that hard. yes, you might miss a little piece of context, but it's better than doing no updates at all. So I do believe that improving and iteration is part of the process. And in terms of that communication, Elizabeth, so you mentioned that you don't want to wait for the Scrum Master to give you the updates that you need. Well, how is that any different to any other meeting that you're having where you're waiting for the results of that?
Well, that's why I like being involved in it and not having, that's why I just prefer to do all of it as a project manager. I mean, yeah, delegation is a whole other discussion, but I mean, that's a whole other topic.
I mean, I get what Simina's trying to say here is that there will still be lead times for decisions from other team members, but adding that intermediary, I'm not sure how. I have not worked in a situation where I've had all three roles. I've had project manager and scrum master roles, and the project manager kind of just sits on this island and is used as
That's how I feel.
as like a red telephone, but otherwise it doesn't really do much. And I became the pseudo project manager as the scrum master. But
yeah,
I think we have a question from Romero. Could intrinsic soft values like charisma, for example, be a game changer to pacify or improve synergy cohesion of a team? I'm just, I guess, because Simina, you've talked a lot about core skills, which again, credit to Melody Gore for coming up with that term instead of soft skills, but there's got to be that element of people skills that are needed, whether you're a Scrum Master, project manager, or a delivery manager. I'm curious if you see that as the biggest key towards cohesion.
Well, yes. And it is a really important aspect of things because at the end of the day, we're all humans. And if we think about Agile and the principles that we have at the basis of Agile is, well, we're supposed to be in the people over processes phase of things. And especially when I think about the psychology of humans and how we interact with and how we actually build teams, is that people don't necessarily listen to the instructions that you provide. They listen to how you say things. So if you have a certain body language, if you're using a certain tone, if you have charisma, if you don't have soft skills, if you're basically talking like a robot, perhaps, all of those things matter, especially when it comes to team building and that cohesion at the team level. So I do believe that whether you're a Scrum Master or a project manager or a delivery manager, those interpersonal skills matter a lot because it does matter how you deliver a certain message, how you're wrapping it up, and the tone and the body language and everything. It is part of the trait. So if as a project manager or Scrum Master, you don't have those soft skills, those communication skills, you're pretty much doomed for failure. I strongly believe that because no amount of process can save you if people don't trust what you're saying.
Yeah.
And if people can't basically be motivated enough to actually listen to you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that was that thing that got me when we first started talking, right? Because you were saying Scrum Master is the servant leader doing that, building trust, but project managers have to build trust. We all do. And Ben just said in the chat, he said emotional intelligence. It's super important. These core skills, the emotional intelligence, whether you're a Scrum Master or you're a project manager or a delivery manager, if you're walking into a room, you're still leading these teams, whether or not you have the authority or not, you're still leading these teams, and the emotional state you're in and how you are communicating is going to impact how the team responds and how they perform as well.
I think, and this gets to the future aspect, whether these three roles or any role in an organization going forward, if you do not have an understanding of emotional intelligence or organizational politics, optics management, understanding nuances, then whether you implement AI or not, or any other functions, you are going to be blown out of the water in terms of people who understand these skills, because this is for career, strategic visibility, business advocacy, and able to lead into leadership positions in an organization. When you're dealing with people, you have to have these core skills. That's it. There is no if, there's but, or whatever.
And on that note, because we're about to be out of time, Simina, can you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. I post quite often there. And I also run a newsletter on Substack. It's called Scrum and Sass. And I think you've already linked those in the
I've
comments.
definitely dropped the links. Now, Scrum and Sass is a little bit different. Can you give us like a 30-second quick kind of what makes it special? Because it's a little different than what you normally see.
It's a little bit of an unfiltered version of Agile. It's basically the human side behind everything else. I do talk a lot about things that project managers and Scrum Masters deal with, like on a personal level, imposter syndrome, burnout, boundaries, and all of those crises mid-sprint. So it's a little bit of a human meets Agile, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you. You were our kind of test subject on doing a debate. I know I got heated in the very beginning. I saw the look on your face. Sorry. But it's fun. And I think we'll definitely want to do these more. Everyone in the audience, if you want us to do more of these types of things, definitely let us know. We'd love to have you back, Simina, to talk more. That's even not a debate, just more intellectually on other things. So thank you for showing up for this, and everyone, thank you for allowing us again into your homes and your offices or your desk, or I think someone was on the plane. So thank you for that. Next week the live, we've got Shane Melton. Everybody has been asking for construction, and we are bringing it to you. And he's a storyteller. So we will see you guys all next week for Shane's live. You can also catch us on TikTok and LinkedIn and YouTube and Instagram, and you name it, just go find PM Career Growth, and we will see you guys next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a fun experience.
Thank you, Simina. We appreciate you.